Welcome on into the Wolverine.com podcast. Clayton Sayfie here with Anthony Broome. We are live from the JW Marriott in Houston, Texas, ready for the national championship game on Monday night. It is Sunday evening right now. We are here to preview Michigan against Washington. We'll go into keys to the game for the Wolverines. We'll give our final score predictions as well. So thank you for everybody joining us, whether it's late Sunday night or on your Monday morning commute. Any other time before kickoff. We are extremely excited for it, but please like this video if you hope that Michigan wins the national championship against Washington. Subscribe to our channel as well. We'll have full coverage, post-game show with Anthony Broome and former All-Big Ten defensive lineman Ryan Van Bergen, as well as post-game press conferences, interviews, shots, scenes from the field, all that. So subscribe to our YouTube channel as well, and head to the Wolverine.com. Exclusive offer for YouTube viewers and podcast listeners. The promo code UM1 gets you premium access for 2 months for just $1, 50 cents a month for the next 2 months. You get in, you can interact with fans on our message board, including us, and get all of our premium coverage. AB, been in Houston for a few days now. The game is going to kick off less than 24 hours from now, from when we're talking at the current moment. How you doing?
I'm great. Again, since last we spoke, spent about 40 hours at home and got right back on a plane. Got here late Friday night and did media day Saturday. We saw practice on Saturday. Coach's joint press conference earlier this morning as we record here on a Sunday night. It's almost go time now. It's not quite the same scale of production in terms of what the Rose Bowl was. You had the extracurriculars, you had the pageantry. Now it's 6 days to a game. Everyone gets back home, regroups, puts the game plan in, gets right back on a plane, and is out here on Friday. So they are playing in the last game that anyone will play this college football season, which is something that obviously people were hopeful for. It's something that a lot of people predicted. But until you get there, until you put in the work, it's tough to predict if it will happen or not. And the fact that we're here, we're recording right now, but this time tomorrow, we're going to be well into the second half of this national championship game. So it's here. It's what everyone was hoping for, what everyone was waiting for, and I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, no doubt. So let's jump into it. But before we do, I want to talk about our friends over at Champions Circle, Michigan's preeminent NIL collective. We have partnered with them, giving them an assist here as they have their push for the Those Who Stay NIL campaign. Michigan fans, donors donating towards bringing Michigan players back for next season. We all know how well the One More Year Fund went for Champions Circle a year ago, and they are running it again with the Those Who Stay campaign. So a bunch of guys, the fans know the names, but a bunch of guys with eligibility remaining that could forego the NFL and return to Michigan. They're well over $500,000 raised as we speak right now. Bunch of big time donors are doing, matching up to a certain amount within a different time periods. So all sorts of stuff going on with that, but they are off to a big start. And we are told that the link that we have in the description here has been doing really well. So thank you to the Wolverine viewers, readers for contributing here, because our link has been going crazy and a lot of people have been donating. So donate what you can is what they're asking. And they're up over $552,000 at this point. So they want to win the national championship on Monday night, but they also want to build towards the future, and that's what this campaign is trying to help with. Let's talk about the Michigan offense here against the Washington defense before we flip things and talk about the Michigan defense against Michael Pennix and those guys. But specifically with the Michigan offense, Anthony, you're going against a Washington defense that is not the strength of their team. They are not, they're kind of middle of the pack in most statistics, some actually further down statistically, defensively. Teams have been able to run the football on this Washington team. Blake Corum should have some opportunities there. Teams have also been able to attack this Washington secondary as well. So this isn't kind of the matchup that everybody's talking about. They're talking about Michael Pennix, those great receivers, and that great Husky offensive line against the Michigan defense, which ranks number one in scoring and a whole bunch of other categories. But this is going to be a really important one too. And I think a huge key here is being able to control time of possession, keep Michael Pennix in that great offense off the field, limit the possessions in this game, because then Joel Klatt was talking about this on his podcast earlier this week, and I thought he made a good point with that every stop you get from there is going to feel like 2 stops because, if you limit those possessions, the margins are so slim. Washington is going to have pressure on themselves to score on every drive, and if you can hold them to field goals or make them punt, those are going to be huge victories.
Absolutely. We talked about it in our media day and practice takeaways from Saturday. That's also on the YouTube channel or over on the website. Be sure to check that out as well. Jesse Minner, when I spoke to him, said every stop that you get in this game, whether that be because forcing field goals in a game like this, those are stops, right? When you have an offense that is as high powered as Washington's is, they are going to run plays that are designed to score pretty much every time out. So getting off the field on 3rd down is huge. Getting off the field in those, in the red zone, forcing field goals and finishing drives too, on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, so much of this, when you look at the storylines between these two teams, it's going to be, I know there's a lot of eye candy in terms of Washington's offense. There's a lot of, for people who love physical smash mouth style of football, there's a lot of eye candy for them in what Michigan does. But to me, when you boil down this game and distill it to its most basic form, I think that's what it winds up coming down to is getting off the field. It's, to me, the teams are, it's not a 1-to-1 comparison, but in terms of Michigan's recipe to winning this game, I think it does look a lot like 2021 Ohio State, to a certain extent 2022. But it's no cakewalk. It's no walk in the park. Just getting here doesn't ensure success here. So I got to regroup. Got to play well on both sides of the ball. And when we talked to Minter, something that stood out to me is, for them, their secondary played the best game that they've played all season against Alabama. They had those guys that were the deep threats over the top. They like to take shots down the field, and Michigan bottled them up. Now, this is what Minter called a whole other animal. I agree with that, but those guys had that good of a performance in the Rose Bowl, and now you get to carry that into a week of game prep for the biggest game, maybe almost, in a certain set of circumstances, it's the biggest game any of these guys will ever play in. So to me, I think that's a good positive thing for Michigan, that you did just come off of a defensive performance that I think was eye-opening for a lot of people, even though we knew they were capable of that.
Yeah, no doubt. Back to the offense real quick. Blake Corum played well against Washington last time, right? I think that's, you got to have confidence.
It's the game that started all this.
What's that?
Arguably. So it's the game that started all this, arguably.
Right. We were just talking about that. Anthony and I were in an Uber coming back from a barbecue dinner, eating some Texas barbecue down here. And AB made the point that game, it was kind of one of the first games here in this mini era. They wore blue on blue, which they will be doing on Monday night, the national championship game. But it's also, it was just a movie scene type of atmosphere at the big house there. It was Jimmy Lake coaching Washington. They ended up going 4-8. That was not a good Washington team. They had lost to Montana the week before, but it is the same 2 programs. And Michigan kind of kicked things off with that big win, even though Washington ended up not being so good. It was still a primetime victory at the big house, one of the first games with fans back, the first big game with fans back. And now here we are, full circle after tough year for Washington. Then they hire Kalen DeBoer, and they've only lost 2 games since the last 2 seasons. So I thought that was a good point. Here we go, full circle. Blake Corum, I think, is going to be key running the football in this game. Teams with comparable physicality, talent, offensive lines, skill position players have been able to run the ball in Washington this year. They ran for Oregon ran for 6.2 yards per carry in the Pac-12 championship game, 5.1 and 204 total yards when the 2 teams played earlier in the year in Seattle. And then Texas in the Sugar Bowl, they averaged 6.4 yards per carry, 180 yards, 3 touchdowns in that game, despite losing and having to really throw to try to get back in the game late. So they were able to move the football. They were able to move the football on the ground. And this brings me to my next point, AB, and it's something you and I have talked about too, as you go over this matchup in recent days, as we're just kind of constantly talking about it, no matter what we're doing here, down here, getting our work done and everything. Michigan, in its style of play under Jim Harbaugh, has the opportunity when they play other very good teams in a big game, high pressure, high stakes, where they'll play these top 15 teams, and if they have the edge in terms of physicality, if they're able to finish the drives like you mentioned earlier, how important that's going to be, and they just kind of roll over them sometimes. Not all the time. Sometimes it just doesn't shake out that way, and you have to win a meat grinder, as Jim Harbaugh, Jack Harbaugh, and Bo Schembechler would say. And we've seen that a lot throughout the years. A few times they've played Iowa, at different points. It's not going to be pretty. Penn State in 2021 was an example. Even Penn State this year, I think you could kind of categorize as a meat grinder to an extent. I think the final score, winning by 9, looked a little bit closer than maybe the game went. But there are some examples of Michigan playing very good football teams, maybe not Washington level good this year, but very good football teams, and kind of rolling over them. And I do have a list of them here that people can reminisce on, but 41-17 over number 10 Penn State and 45-23 over number 2 Ohio State in 2022, 42-3 over number 15 Iowa, 42-27 over number 2 Ohio State in 2021, 45-14 over number 8 Notre Dame in 2019, 38-13 over number 15 Wisconsin, and 42-7 over number 14 Penn State in 2018, and so on. There are some other examples of this. So I'm not saying that's going to happen. We're going to get to our final score predictions. I'm not predicting a Michigan blowout, but I think that's a possibility here. And again, I'll talk about Washington's offense in a second, a little bit more, but they have a high octane offense that could run up some points quickly too. So I'm not saying that any scenario is out of play here. I'm saying there is a chance that if Michigan can get that edge up front and kind of bulldoze and use the boa constrictor, analogy like Joel Klatt does, they can win this game pretty big. Again, not predicting it, but I do think it's something worth mentioning with the way Michigan plays against a defense like this. This could happen.
I think the conditions are ripe for that, to be honest with you. For as much talk as there is about Michael Pennix, and there was an NFL scout that said, the Washington wide receivers are 3 of the best, or one of the best cores of wide receivers they've ever evaluated. That's all fine and good. If this winds up being a game where, I'll put it to you this way, Michigan probably should have won that Alabama game by a few scores, if not for its own self-inflicted wounds, because they absolutely owned the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. If Michigan plays like that again against this Washington team, and again, it's a much better offensive line, I think that storyline probably isn't getting as much play as maybe it should. But if Michigan comes out mashing up front on both sides of the ball, I do think you're looking at a scenario where this could be some of those like some of those lopsided games. When Michigan plays in a game like that, pretty early on that they're in it, and it could be a rough day at the office for the other teams. Now, Ohio State 2022 was a game where you kind of just had to feel it out, and then it opened up for you later on. Sure. It's a different kind of blowout. But if Michigan is cooking up front on both sides of the ball, I don't know that Washington has the size to hang with that. I don't know if they have the physicality. And to be frank, I don't know if they have the experience for it either. So very good football team. We will get to our game predictions. I'm not exactly predicting a blowout, but I do think there's a better chance that Michigan blows out Washington than it is that Washington wins. And maybe that's my hot take for the episode, but I just, we'll talk about the rest of that later. But when you look at what they after 4 weeks of prep, what that offensive line looked like, what that defensive line looked like, I think it's clear advantage there for Michigan heading into a game like this because Washington has not seen a team like this. And I'm happy to eat my words if it comes off as hubris, if it comes off as something I'm going to have to eat crow for later on. That's fine. I'm happy to do that. You guys know that. But I feel like that this Michigan team, I feel like they have a complete game that's still in them, but we'll see. It's still one of those coin flip games. There's so many variables going into it.
Totally. And I do also think it's kind of interesting because in the Rose Bowl, we saw a ton of nerves. I mean, J.J. McCarthy, I don't know if it was nerves or what, but he had guys open early in that first play from scrimmage, didn't throw the football, kind of rolled out and throws it right to Caleb Downs there on the sideline. Fortunately, as we all know, he was out of bounds, didn't reestablish himself. Turns out it was overturned, incomplete. But, man, I mean, that could have been a deadly mistake for Michigan earlier on in the game. And then you look at Samaj Morgan's muffed punt. I mean, Jake Thaw muffed the punt as well. Also, I think we may have talked about this last week or earlier this week or however you want to call it. I don't even know what day of the week it is anymore. that it was still impressive that Jake Thaw corralled the football and hung on to it. But that's kind of another story. I mean, there were bad snaps from Michigan. There were bad snaps from Alabama as well, as we all know. And that guy's now going to Ohio State, the Alabama center. But look, there were a lot of nerves in that game. And I think maybe less in Washington's game, but they muffed a punt too. I mean, the two teams that muffed a punt last Monday are playing in the national championship game. There were some turnovers in that game, but this is a bigger stage. But you did play a week ago on a stage that's similar. So I do wonder what the nerves are going to be like for each team too. Because J.J. McCarthy, there are some games where he's kind of off on his first few throws, and then he'll rip off like 10 straight completions. I wonder what he's going to look like early on, because when you're playing a team like Washington, you want to have a fast start on both sides of the ball, but particularly offensively. And you want to start to win the field position battle. It'll be also interesting to see how Tommy Doman comes out, because that was kind of an uncharacteristic performance by him, punting the ball, 35, 40 yards at best in that game against Alabama. So the nerves, I think, are something to watch.
For sure. And I think that when you look at offensively how this game could open, if I suspect in the game script, whatever those first 10 to 15, however many plays they have set up, I think you're probably looking at a steady diet of Blake Corum. With the way that he closed out last week's game, with the way that we think they could or should be able to run the ball against this Oregon team. I mean, if they're able to establish a running attack early on, that is kind of the exhale and the sigh of relief for the Michigan offense, because you're going to if you're able to run the ball right off the bat, you can run just about anything in your playbook off of that. And I think that Washington's going to have a rough time defending it if that is the case. So for me, getting off to a fast start is obviously critical. And you look back to last week's game, and I talked to Jay Harbaugh for a little bit on Saturday, and he said when he went back and watched the film about that special teams performance, what struck out to him was how many uncharacteristic plays were made by guys that have a long history this season of stepping up and being reliable in those big moments. Tommy Doman shanked punts. We saw that James Turner missed an extra point. Samaj as a punt returner is still kind of a new development, but he wouldn't have been in that role if he hadn't shown them what he was capable of in game prep and practices and behind the scenes. And, Jake Thaw, for as much grief as that play at the goal line could have been, to have the wherewithal to still not let one mistake turn into two and secure the football, take that hit. They don't rep things like that necessarily, because as Jay Harbaugh said,
teams should.
I think. Well, here's what he said about that, is that you don't necessarily want to rep that, because then you're sort of planting a seed in their head. We're like, well, why are we repping mistakes? Like, do they not trust me to do the right thing? And there's some overthinking that's involved. So
that's fair too.
That can be kind of a sensitive situation. But yeah, I mean, I think that there is going to be a little, it's maybe a little bit overplayed, but Michigan knows its offensive line throughout this year didn't exactly play up to that Joe Moore standard they had set. Now they're playing a team that has the Joe Moore Award winner. And for that offensive line that heard for 4 weeks, it couldn't hang with the SEC. They were going to get punched in the mouth and all that stuff. I think that, make no mistake about it, I mean, this group, I won't say finds ways to manufacture a chip on its shoulder, but, they want to finally play to that standard, because when they did win that award, they didn't play well in the college football playoffs. So I think there's some motivation there. We'll see what I suspect there's going to be some more room for those wide receivers to operate a little bit compared to the two corners that they saw in the Rose Bowl. But offensively, a fast start is paramount, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to, say you win the coin toss, you defer. Washington marches right down the field and scores, because that could happen. And then you come out on offense and either turn over the ball or go 3 and out. Then all of a sudden, Washington has the ball again with a stick of dynamite in its hand, basically, threatening to go up 2 scores before you've even really gotten to your game script. So a fast start is huge. That's, by far the biggest key to this game to me is not getting off to a slow start, because I think that this Washington team is maybe a little more set up to bury you, especially through the air, than that Alabama team was.
And the other thing with that is that if you do get behind in this game, and you probably do have an advantage with your O-line against their front seven, that advantage is minimized just a little bit or even significantly because you can't run quite as much. Now, I think Michigan will still stick with the run. I think we've seen that throughout the years, but you get down 14, 17 points. And look, Michigan has done that in some of these playoff games in the past. And Georgia, you kind of throw out, but TCU comes to mind. And we'll see if Washington throws different looks at Michigan that kind of catches it off guard. But then you don't play the game on your terms. And you want to play this game given the clash in different styles here on your terms. Couple last notes on the Washington defense before we move to the other side of the football and talk about Michael Pennix and that fantastic offense. But they rank 44th in the country in ESPN's SP Plus ratings on that side of the ball. If they beat Michigan, they will be a major outlier. A team ranked worse than 30th in that metric, SP Plus defense, has not won the national championship since Oklahoma in 1950. And as Bill Connolly from ESPN.com pointed out, when Michigan has played teams that rank around 44th, they played Minnesota at 31, Michigan State was ranked 45th. They've won those games in blowout fashion, 52-10 at Minnesota, 49-0 at Michigan State. Of course, Washington has a much better offense that we'll talk about in a second, but Michigan can put big points up, and it speaks to the point we talked about earlier, against defenses of this caliber. Now, they do have some very good players on this defense. It starts with Braylon Trice as kind of the headliner there, the defensive end, outside linebacker, edge rusher, who leads the country in pressures. Let's see, 77 pressures, but he has 46 tackles, 11.5 are behind the line of scrimmage, 7 sacks on the year. He is PFF's number 17 overall NFL draft prospect. So keep an eye on number 8 on Monday night. Rest of their D-line, just okay. They do have a linebacker, Edefuan Ulofoshio, and I think I said that right, who is very good. Associated Press second team All-American. And then at corner, Jabbar Muhammad, he's been big for them this year, all Pac-12 second team performer. But that's kind of the Michigan offense against the Washington defense. Now let's flip it over, AB, and talk about Michael Pennix, Romo Dunze, Joe Moore award-winning offensive line against the Michigan defense, which stepped up huge against Alabama. I think we talked about this on Thursday, though. You kind of scrapped that game plan. And Kenneth Grant, I brought that up to Kenneth Grant on Saturday, and he said, yeah, it's a different challenge. I mean, you're not going to be chasing around Pennix as much as you're going to be trying to make him uncomfortable in the pocket, make him backpedal instead of be able to step into his throws with clear throwing lanes. But your thoughts on the biggest keys for this Michigan defense going against Michael Pennix, fantastic receivers, and O-line that can give him some time?
Well, the scariest thing, too, about Michael Pennix is that he's a guy that even this year has shown when he does get knocked off of his spot, he can still fire it in there off of his back foot and do something crazy. And, he throws, again, someone will jump in the comments and talk about his mechanics and what pro scouts say. But what, for my money's worth, he throws one of the best balls I've ever seen. That's college, NFL, regardless. The velocity, the accuracy, the stuff that he does on fades and the back shoulder throws is insane. And his chemistry with those guys, Romo Dunze and Jalen Polk and some of those other guys, it's insane. That's the only way I can really describe it. And again, it is you go from playing an Alabama team that wants to be physical. They play downhill. The quarterback is even going to run straight at you. And it's a game you gotta have to,
straight at
things
you.
up and
even on fourth down with the game on the line.
Even on 4th and 3 with the Rose Bowl on the line. It's a totally different challenge. But what we've seen from Jesse Minter's defense is they have traveled throughout the year. They've won. Now, they have not seen anything like this. They might not have seen a passing game like this at all in these last 3 years, even with what Ohio State has thrown out. Ohio State 2021 is probably the closest thing, to a lesser extent what they had last year as well. But the key is, again, mixing up those coverages. It's sort of similar to what we talked about last week in terms of what Michigan had to do to catch those Alabama edge rushers off balance, is that you have to do something that makes them think, because even if that slows them down, they're processing whatever for a split second. In that split second, you could have some kind of exotic pressure coming. You could have a blitz up the middle. You could have a man coverage that looks like a zone. you have to show something to slow him down before the football is even snapped. So that's the biggest chess match to me when you look at the defensive side of the ball. They are going to move the ball. They are going to score points. He is probably going to make at least 3 or 4 throws in this game where it is perfectly covered, either by Will Johnson, Josh Wallace, Mikey Sainristil, whoever winds up being, where it's going to be textbook coverage. It's going to be exactly where it needed to be. And maybe it's on a 3rd and 12 and they pick up 16, 17 yards. They're going to do things that frustrate you. And they're going to do things that, if you're a fan watching at home, is probably going to elevate your heart rate. But as we talked about earlier, it's getting off the field in a couple of those key 3rd down situations. It's forcing, field goals in the red zone or in field goal range. That to me is where, any stop, and field goals are stops, turnovers are stops, 3rd downs are stops. Any and all of those should be celebrated in this game, because I think there's a chance that even if you play a good defensive game, you could give up a point total that's in the mid to high 20s, maybe even in the low 30s. The best defense that you can possibly play in this game is limiting the possessions they have by sustaining a ball control, sort of that boa constrictor type of offense. So we talk all the time about complementary football. To me, this is the quintessential complementary football game for Michigan. You can't have special teams errors. You got to stay on the field on offense, and on defense, you just have to do enough. You just have to do enough. And if you do more than enough, you might win this game going away. But that's a huge key, is not getting frustrated. Guys are going to get beat. You're going to have the perfect pressure dialed up. You're going to have the perfect coverage dialed up. And you might even get pressure. And Michael Pennix is going to do something insane. And you just have to line back up and do it again. And I think this team has the mental wherewithal to do that. We've seen that over the span of 14 weeks. But this is their biggest challenge yet. And especially this year, they have not seen anything like this. I mean, when we're sitting here and saying the closest thing that they've seen that approximates this is Maryland, no disrespect to Maryland, I think that says a lot about, one, the quality of the passing offenses on the schedule, and 2, just how much better this Washington one is than anyone else.
You just segued perfectly into what I wanted to bring up next, because there is a theory out there. There's a stat out there. When you mention Michigan's biggest test in this area being Maryland, and they were able to hit on some throws. Michigan tightened things up. They started to get pressure. Mikey Sainristill's 2 picks were obviously massive in that game. And then they get the safety at the end and everything else, and great special teams play. But there's a theory out there too, and I think there's credence to it, but I also don't fully buy into it, that Washington hasn't really been tested at all in terms of past defenses that they played. So I'm going to read off the stat that kind of went viral, I think, on Saturday night, that people started to share. But these are the national rankings for the past defenses that Washington faced this year. Some of them. I think it's just 12 in here on this tweet. But Stanford, 133rd. One, hand up. I didn't even know there were 133 teams. Thought it was 131, so Stanford must have been really bad. Tulsa is 131. Michigan State, 98th. Good for them. Cal, 127th. Oregon, 65th. Arizona, 89th. ASU, 124th. USC ranks 93rd. Utah, 79th. Oregon State, 98th. Washington State, 85th. Texas, as we all know, coming into that game is one of the key storylines, ranks 105th in pass defense. So devil's advocate, or not even devil's advocate, but just to point out the other side, is Washington hasn't seen anything like this Michigan defense that ranks number 1 in pass defense. That's probably a little deceiving too, because like your point is true that Michigan hasn't really been tested in that area this year. You know, McCord and Talia Tagovailoa and Milroe were the 3 best quarterbacks they played all year. None of them are anywhere near what Michael Pennix is, and then you pair that with the time he gets from their O-line and the receivers that they have. Rome Odunze is incredible. He's a number 10 NFL draft prospect, according to PFF. But Jalen Polk, Jalen McMillan, who has missed time this year, but still has well over 500 yards. He's missed about a quarter of the season, actually more than that, a third of the season. So they do have great weapons. You watch Michael Pennix. I mean, the film doesn't lie at how impressive they are. But devil's advocate a little bit, they haven't faced something like Michigan with the pressure that they can bring and the secondary that Michigan has with Will Johnson, and Josh Wallace is held up in the safety play. And to something you pointed to earlier that is going to be majorly crucial in this game is Jesse Minter, Steve Klingscale, Mike Elson, the different fronts, the different coverages that they can play, and the way they can disguise those fronts and coverages.
Yeah, and you know what, the other thing that I think has been really interesting about the DNA and the make of this team is the fact that, you know, we've seen a lot throughout the year when someone, there's been a narrative that, oh, well, X team does this better. This team in this matchup does this better. And you know, there's no way Michigan, you know, JJ McCarthy can match whatever the narrative is. I suspect that, I think the passes, I've said I suspect a lot. Is that a new thing for me? I don't know.
I think, yeah.
I don't know. Sorry, I'm thrown off by the amount of times I've repeated that phrase tonight. But I think that the passing game, there will be an emphasis on it. I think that there is. I asked Kurt Campbell about it at Media Day. You know, it's not like a, oh, well, this, we're going to stick it to them because they've been talking about Michael Pennix. But I think when you look at what this, it's going to be a balanced attack. I think you're going to get the steady diet of Blake Corum. I think you'll see JJ McCarthy have his 25, 27, maybe even 30 pass attempts, whatever. You know, it depends on the amount of snaps you get. But this feels like a Roman Wilson game. This feels like a Colston Loveland game. You know, it feels like we are going to get one of those early season type of JJ McCarthy performances where you see him go like 24 of 29 for 275 and a pair of scores. Mind you, he needs 3 touchdowns to tie that, to tie the all-time single season record, which again, asterisk next to it in terms of playing 15 games. But JJ McCarthy is the type of guy that we've seen that doesn't typically repeat performances and repeat mistakes. And he had a great final drive, had a few great individual plays in that Rose Bowl, but not his best performance. And I feel like that we're going to see that guy's best for last here.
Yeah, that would be huge. Last thing for me, just on this past game from Washington, from, you know, actually watching them and understanding, you know, taking some of the numbers out of it of the teams they've played and this and that. What stands out about this team is that he gets the ball out quickly, but it doesn't mean that they're throwing a bunch of 3-yard passes or screens. They do a lot of that because they throw a lot. So you're going to mix in that. It's almost supplements your run game to a certain extent, but they're able to throw deep passes quickly. And something you really notice, and Kalen DeBoer, their head coach, I have been impressed with him since he was at Indiana, helping Michael Pennix, you know, have some success there. But his scheme is fantastic. The way they get free releases for the wide receivers, one, the receivers are really good, so they're able to just kind of get off the line clean. But two, he'll stack them, kind of like Michigan does. They'll use motion to get these guys free releases so they can get down the field quickly. Michael Pennix has a great offensive line and a really quick release, and can, you know, 3-step drop. It could still be a deep ball. And this is a stat that proves this, that it's always great when you kind of notice something and then you actually can find the stats to back it up. And I was able to find this. Pennix average throw depth is 10.4 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, according to Sports Info Solutions. That ranks 27th in the country, but his 2.71 seconds to throw is the 35th quickest in the country, minimum 100 pass attempts. So he gets it out quick, but he's still pushing the football downfield. He leads the sport in completions, 50 in attempts, 108 on passes of 20-plus yards in the air. So the ball's going to be pushed downfield. They're going to, it might even be on quick passes. So these Michigan guys are going to have to try to, be physical at the line against the receivers, but they're also going to have to cover from the moment that ball snapped, or even maybe the moment a guy's in motion, to the moment the whistle is blown. It's going to be a big challenge for Will Johnson, who may travel, from one side of the field to the other with Romo Dunze, but Mikey Sainer still, Josh Wallace, the safeties, the scheme. Maybe they went with a little bit of dime, personnel early in the Alabama game on some of those 3rd and longs. I think they realized they didn't need to anymore, but maybe we see that look again with Keon Sabb or Quentin Johnson coming in. It's going to be all hands on deck in the secondary.
Every hand on deck. I think, every hand you have is, I guess by definition, that's what all hands on deck.
And the pass rush. The pass rush as well. I mean, they're going to have to push him back. It's going to have to come from the interior. And that O-line, we mentioned Joe Moore award winning, a couple times here. Tavondre Sweat is the Outland Trophy Award winner. Unbelievable, just a beast of a defensive tackle. I saw him in person earlier this year for Texas. He hardly got through to Michael Pennix. He had 2 pressures, but they really held him in check. And I know some people have pointed to Washington's center being 275 pounds. He's still very good. He went from not playing at all last year as a true freshman that ended up redshirting to being a second-team all Pac-12 performer. They have a great offensive line, so it's going to be a battle in the trenches. And I think these Michigan guys are revved up for that too. You talk about, kind of trying to shove it in their face. I mean, there's going to be a lot of talk from the Michigan D linemen if they win that game on Monday night about how, they overcame the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line. So as always, the pass rush and the coverage have to play, complementary and really tie in together.
Yeah, all of these phases. And again, this was something else that Minter said when I talked to him on Saturday, is that, to have a game like they had against Alabama, where again, yeah, there were times where they got run on a little bit in that second half, but defensive line has confidence that the back end is going to hold up. The back end has confidence that defensive line, that front seven, is going to get enough pressure to make their jobs a little bit easier, so that you have that cohesiveness and the chemistry not only built throughout the year, but you just came off a performance that you hang your hat on. I mean, what they were able to do against Alabama was honestly pretty, I won't say unexpected, but I think Minter seemed even surprised in his own right in terms of how effective they were at all 3 levels of the defense. So got to find a way to bottle that up, got to find a way to repeat it. It's a confident group. I think they are a well-coached and well-studied group. I think we know that there was I don't want to use the term advanced scouting and get anyone in trouble, but they had 4 weeks to prepare for the college football playoff, and you knew who 2 of the other teams were. So, you've had guys within the program looking at tendencies and looking at ways to get an upper hand. And I think what sticks out to me the most about this Michigan team is, 1, more often than not, it doesn't beat itself. And 2, it is the most single-minded, well-prepared team I think I've ever seen, just in terms of being able to lock in every single week, quick turnaround, long turnaround, bye week, off-field scandal, 4 weeks of bowl prep, whatever it is, they have found ways to give themselves an upper hand by how hard they prepare and the game plans that they put in place. So you just need them to do enough and come up in those big moments. You don't have to be everyone's everything on every single snap. Now, if you are, you're probably winning this game going away, but
it'd be nice.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great. I'm sure a lot of Michigan fans would prefer to have their victory cigars lit in the third quarter. I don't know if that'll be the case in this game, but this is just a fascinating matchup because it's a contrast in styles. It's going to be, in terms of the college football playoff, no SEC team. I think a lot of people will probably tune into this game just because of that. And you have the whole nation rooting against you too. That's the other thing. And that hasn't changed at all, but there's still an edge. There's still a swagger about this group, despite being the number 1 team in the country. Despite, it'd be very easy to come out and puff your chest out about beating big, bad Alabama. But, a year ago, once they got off that plane from the Fiesta Bowl, they spoke this trip into existence. And now that they're here, they're still kind of, from our perspective, there's a whiplash in it because, 4 days ago, Ballas and I were eating tacos on Manhattan Beach, and now we're Ubering around the city trying to find Texas barbecue that's still open late on a Sunday night. So, but those guys expected to be here. So I have no questions about their ability to lock in and be able to do enough, because I think it's a well-studied group of guys, and I think it's a brilliant group of coaches on both sides of the ball, but namely on defense as well.
For sure. I agree with everything that you just said. And just to wrap up the Washington offense, I think a key matchup is going to be Jalen Polk, their slot receiver, Texas Tech transfer, against Mikey Sainristil. He has over 1,100 yards, 9 touchdowns, 65 receptions this year. Mikey's been a little bit erratic in coverage at times when he does have to cover. I mean, he's been great near the line of scrimmage, coming up, making hits and making plays. And he's been very good in coverage at other times too. I mean, 5 interceptions, a couple pick sixes. I'm not knocking Mikey Sainristil, but this is going to be the best slot receiver he'll have played. And when you have a great receiver, really 2 great receivers on the outside too, and Rome Odunze and Jalen McMillan, I mean, you can't add extra attention on just one guy with this receiving core. And then you add that in with the fact that Jack Westover, their tight end, is really good and will be heavily involved in the pass game as well. Made some really tough catches in that game against Texas. So that's a Michigan defense against the Washington offense. We'll get to our final score predictions and offensive defensive player of the game predictions in just a second. I do want to spend just a couple minutes, though, AB, and obviously we'll talk way more about this win or lose. But going in, I mean, this is just a big moment for Jim Harbaugh as well. He has talked about how winning the national title would be more for his players and more for the coaches and more for the families. He said, really not as much for me. I mean, what he's saying is great. And to an extent, it is absolutely true. I mean, when you're a leader at the top, it is more about the people you're leading. But he's a competitive guy. He wants to win one too. This could be massive. I mean, the Big Ten has only won 2 national titles this century, both from Ohio State. We know how they operate, kind of like a Southern team. The South has dominated this sport on the national stage for years, decades. He would become one of 6 Michigan coaches to win a national title. He'd become one of 5 active head coaches to win a national title. Dabo Swinney, Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, and Mac Brown being the others. And Mac Brown won it with a different program. But only 5 active guys. He's already about to become one of 2 head coaches to coach in both the Super Bowl and the national title game. This is a big moment for Jim Harbaugh. His legacy as a legend was cemented before he even came back and, to coach this team. He's a Michigan football legend. He keeps adding to that resume, and this would be a really, really big step for him as well.
And don't believe for a second that this won't mean the world to him. He's the ultimate deflector. He's the ultimate, talk to these guys type of guy. But you're our resident Jim Harbaugh historian. He never won a Super Bowl with anyone, right?
No, he was close with a couple teams. Chargers got really close.
Okay, this could be his first championship in anything, really. Yeah. When you think about his football life that goes back, over 40 years now, this would mean the world to him, and this would be
to do it with this group, to do it with
this group, yeah. This team, this year, given everything that's gone on, because even when he wasn't there, like again, he was in the building all week. His fingerprints are all over this team. You talk to players as frequently as we do, and they start to echo, like they speak themselves organically the way that he speaks. I mean, I have no issue saying if they close this deal out, I think that he is the best Michigan football coach in the history of the program, because he's a guy that will have had that type of big success in the NFL. He's already had the big success at Michigan, but to win 3 Big Ten titles, with I'd say 2 of them with Ohio State at the height of its superpowers, for all the grief that Ryan Day has gotten and about how things have gone the last few years, that team was a missed kick away from playing for a national title last year. So again, to do what they've done to completely break Ohio State, and I think that is not something that's going to get remedied anytime soon from their end of the deal, even if Michigan does fall off a bit after this year. I mean, he is we will talk about it after the fact, but as we for as much as people discuss how that 2020 season was a Mickey Mouse campaign and how it didn't really matter, in a lot of ways, that's the most consequential season in Michigan football history, especially if they find a way to win this national title on Monday night. So if he finds a way to pull this off and to win it for his alma mater, which is what he came to Michigan to do, maybe didn't expect it to take 9 years to do, but they have been in the conversation. Anyone who says that this success that they've had came post-COVID is they were a spot of a football away in 2016 from being in the college football playoff. 2018, they just completely crapped the bed in the biggest moment of the season. To finally get over this hump would mean everything to him, would mean everything to this program. And yeah, I mean, I think there's, who knows what the future holds. He likes to say, no man knows the future now. He just hopes to have a future. But if he goes out and actually leads this team to a national title, and really the first outright national title since 1948, it will have been the most earned, the most legitimate national title I think you could possibly win, given that it's been almost 3 months since the sign stealing stuff came out, and they just kept winning. And they just, win at Penn State, win at Ohio State, win against Alabama in the Rose Bowl. I mean, it's they got a chance to do one more. And if they do that one more with all of everything stripped away, Chris Partridge gone, your signs, I mean, the sign stealing, which is legal, operation kind of ripped out root and branch to borrow from Rich Eisen. It is completely and totally legitimate, and it will be Jim Harbaugh's crowning achievement at any level of the sport. So, yeah, I agree with that's my long-winded way of saying this dude's a Michigan icon already, but he becomes a Michigan legend, and maybe even something more. I don't know what more than a legend is.
It would be more because he already is a legend.
Yeah, I don't know what that is or what that descriptor would be, but if they find a way to close this out, this is what a remarkable turnaround, because this thing felt like it was dead in the water or close to it on life support 3 years ago, and took a lot of time. It took a lot of effort, but he was willing to put in that work, and the guys that stuck around were willing to put in that work, and that's why they're playing for a national title on Monday, because they just stuck to it and kept going, and they have to do it one more time. But yeah, in terms of legacy, what's on the line, I don't think there is a descriptor bigger and too big to put on the job that he's done, not just at Michigan, but this year.
Yeah, I think he's the best coach in the country. I mean, you can't compare coaches apples to apples because every situation is different. I mean, Georgia is using the Alabama recruiting operation method, the methods that they use, but in a more talent-rich state. And we've seen them have more success over the last few years with Kirby Smart. It's not to say he's not a good coach, but they have built-in advantages down there, or advantages that Michigan doesn't. Alabama, same thing. A lot of these Southern teams just kind of look at the way college football plays out. So it's not apples to apples, but what Jim Harbaugh's done to get his team here, and then if he can win the national title, really Kalen DeBoer too would be a hell of an accomplishment for him, and it already is that he's in this spot too. But it's remarkable where this team is at, and it's hard to fathom. I believe that I actually picked them to win the national championship before the year, but it's still surreal that we're actually in Houston ready to cover this game. And with that, let's talk about our predictions as we close out here, Anthony. Offensive player of the game. I'm going to go with J.J. McCarthy. He's the Rose Bowl offensive player of the game. Blake Corum easily could have been that as well. You could make an argument that Trevor Keegan, was one of those guys that would have deserved something like that. He's not going to get it because of his position, but there are going to be some guys that need to step up if Michigan wins it. But I'm going to go with J.J. McCarthy because I think there are going to be some crucial plays that he makes, but he's going to be one of a few, I think, that are going to not feast, but it may be feast, but have a lot of success on Monday on the offense.
It's Blake Corum for me. I mean, just keep it rolling now. This is, again, we talked about earlier how that Washington game back in 2021 was kind of, I don't know that we could sit here and say, oh, well, gosh, that, at the time we weren't saying, oh, this program's back, but to do what they did in one of the better Michigan atmospheres I can ever recall. Corum had 21 carries, 171 yards, 3 touchdowns. I wouldn't be surprised to see a similar type of line than that. I mean, this is a guy that, especially when you look at how he played in the Rose Bowl, not going to be denied. I think maybe the best, all things considered, maybe the best run of his career to score that touchdown in overtime. Just the footwork, the vision, the balance, the contact courage. Like that is his iconic moment. I think he might have another one or two of those in him. So that's my pick.
I like that. I could have easily gone there as well. Defensive player of the game. I'm going to go with Rod Moore. I think that safety play is going to be huge in this game, not only for, what he's going to have to do in coverage and what the other safeties are going to have to do in coverage, but also just tackling. I mean, there may be a guy that catches the ball short and is in the open field. Rod Moore, who we know is great at open field tackling, is going to have to come up and make a play. Otherwise, Washington, could turn this thing into a track meet. So I think it's going to be Rod Moore. I think he's going to step up.
I'm going to stay in the secondary and say Will Johnson. This is, again, he's not draft eligible this year, but if he is lined up across from Rome Odunze, that is that is what the NFL scouts that will be at NRG Stadium are there to see. And there's there to see a lot of things, but that's good on good. That's good on good. That's great on great. That's really elite on elite. That's two guys that are probably going to be, conservatively speaking, top 15 draft picks when Will Johnson's time comes, presumably 2025 NFL draft, but we'll see. I think that he is going to, again, you're not going to lock down. I don't think they're going to lock down Odunze by any stretch, but I think that that's going to be a battle. And I think that Johnson's going to win enough of them to where you kind of hold him back from being the game breaker he has been a lot of times this year. So Will Johnson, my pick for defensive player of the game.
Yeah, huge matchup. And I'm sure he'll match up with other guys too, but I'm sure he'll be on Odunze quite a bit. Final score predictions. I got 34-24, Michigan winning its 12th ever national title. I think that it's going to be close, all the way through. I think it could look like a meat grinder at times, but I do think Michigan's going to kind of have that edge and be able to get up a couple scores at the end and get the stops that they need. But I got Michigan winning by 10 points.
Before I give mine, I'll just want to roll through a couple, the other guys that did through their staff picks in. Ballas has Michigan winning 34-27. John Borton picked Michigan 30, Washington 24. And of course, Doug Skeen has Michigan 31, Washington 17. So predicting that's not quite a blowout. It is a multiple score game.
And Skeen's got history with Washington too. 91.
He does.
92.
He does have a history with them. We have a brief history with Washington, given that we're both covering the team for different outlets at the time during that 2021 season. Like I said, this game is going to be an interesting clash of styles. It's an explosive offense versus a Michigan team that, again, the boa constrictor has been the comparison that keeps coming up. Listen, I wouldn't be surprised to see this game devolve into a bit of a shootout early on, but I think for me, and it's obviously not the same situation. You were the number one seed. You were expected to win the Rose Bowl, but taking down Alabama the way they did reminds me a lot of, the come down from having to lock in one more time and play one more game, like when USA Hockey beat the Russians back in 1980. I think that Michigan is going to come out loose. I think they will start fast, and I think that this will be a game that harkens back to maybe that 2021 Ohio State game. I have Michigan winning 41-27. I think it will be neck and neck, probably into the third quarter before Michigan starts to pull away and start to see them hammer on them late with that running game. So I just think that Michigan's going to be able to dial up and score what they need to score to get out of there. And I think the defense is going to do enough. If they can keep Washington under 30 points, I feel really good about Michigan, but I already feel really good about Michigan. So Michigan 41, Washington 27, maize and blue confetti will fall at NRG Stadium on Monday night.
And Ann Arbor will burn to the ground on Monday night if Michigan wins the national title. Certainly hoping it happens for all the Michigan fans out there. Thank you so much for following our coverage throughout the season. It's not over. Job's not finished for us. Continue to follow it over at thewolverine.com, but truly cannot thank you enough.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yeah.
It's really weird that this is the first time since the Citrus Bowl in January 1, 2020, where we've gone into a game knowing that was the last game of the year. Because COVID season, didn't know what was going to happen with that.
Yeah.
Playoff seasons, didn't know which way it was going to go, but this is for sure now the last game, and it's the biggest game. So to have you guys along for the ride has been incredible. Our coverage doesn't stop. I mean, if Michigan wins this thing, that's going to be a high that takes everyone into whatever comes the next few weeks. A lot of future decisions will be sorted out after this game.
Either
all
way,
the talk is you'll talk about it after the season. Well, guess what? Season ends less than by the time this podcast is out. Season ends today, so we'll see what the future holds. Hopefully, whatever it holds includes a national title for your Michigan Wolverines. We'll see what happens, though.
For sure. So, thank you to everybody for following it throughout the year. We could not live out our passion without your passion for Michigan football. So thank you so much for that. Please like the video on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're going to have full coverage on the field, everything else from the national championship game. And head to thewolverine.com. Promo code UM1 gets you 2 months of premium access for just $1. So 50 cents per month. Try us out. Check us out at thewolverine.com. We'll see you next time.